day of creation. And today is a beautiful one about a higher perspective. And in this one, what happens is we get this beautiful line from Genesis 1. And the Lord created an heaven above and an earth below, and he separated the heavens above from the earth below. That's the day we're looking at here. And the beautiful part of that I was thinking about this morning is just seeing again, like just sort of taking a breath and breathing into the rhythm of creation, the rhythm of all these things, and how they're so true of all of our lives, and we can just sense them. I mean, that's why this story is true. I love the idea that a myth isn't true because it happened. A myth is true because it happens over and over again. I think that's very true of this story. This is one of those stories I think we can very easily sort of read our own selves into. So let's do that just for a second and see, yeah, just share kind of where God might be trying to offer us a little perspective here on what's going on with life. So I've been looking at, light and dark, and the idea of God making the distinction between the two. And notice it's not the judgment of it. It's not that my shine is better than yours. It's none of that stuff. It's just saying, hey, there's a distinction between light and dark. And we start to get aware of that, and that becomes like an aha moment. And we start to understand distinction in a brand new way. And we use the example of Martin Luther King as somebody who clearly was able to have a distinction between right and wrong, but it wasn't one that excluded people. It was one that invited people. And that's super key. And now, and this one's very similar. Now we're talking about the creation of heaven and earth and the expansion, excuse me, the blessing of both and the blessing of that distinction between the two. So the first one kind of, I kind of look at it as a distinction this way between light and dark. And this one's more of distinction this way, at least how I hold it in my head, between the heavens and the earth. And what's significant here, I think, in terms of a starting point is this. We're talking here about the creation of heaven and earth. I mean, that's the whole story of creation, right? It's a heaven and earth, heaven and earth, heaven and earth. It's not you have heaven over here, earth over here. You have these two things, and you do have a distinction between the two, where we can see whether we're coming from a higher perspective or a lower perspective. And we need both, like, yep, there's a distinction. And somehow we make that distinction. It helps us to be able to shift lenses between the two. What does that mean? Well, it means that in our life, we will go through some incredibly hard, challenging times. And there's no doubt some of you tuning in today are going through just incredibly hard, challenging times. And in the midst of all those challenges, in the midst of how hard things are, sometimes it just takes a minute to take a breath and to think, okay, what's the higher perspective here? And then what's the lower perspective here? Now, again, it's not saying the lower perspective is always bad. I want to be clear about that. So let's just play around with that for a second. It's interesting. I know for myself and my own relationships, I know working with people on their relationships, it's amazing how much of the time we kind of get into the weeds on a lower perspective, and we're arguing about stuff, and none of that really matters. I mean, how many times have you got yourself in an argument and it's just like you have this moment where it's this eye of like, oh, this doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't matter. Maybe you're arguing about, I don't know, an address or something, or the weather, or any of that stuff, and you get to the point where it's just like, oh, this just doesn't really matter. It's because we get lost in the weeds. So we need to have a higher perspective there that's just able to see that for what it is. And it again, it doesn't mean that we don't have to have the lower perspective too, folks, because I think we don't want to be detached from the world either, always looking from things from the highest point. Especially when people are in trouble, especially when they're in the weeds and they're just really hurting. Like, maybe there's a space to work in, a little higher perspective thought with them. My experience for the most part is that's not necessarily what they want to hear. They just want somebody with them to hold their hand. They just want somebody there to just be with them in that hard place, and they will eventually come back out of it. Now, maybe there's times to say something. Wouldn't say that, but I would just urge us all to be cautious about that. So, folks, with this, like, that higher perspective, There's no doubt that all of us have a certain part of our day or a certain relationship or a certain upcoming event right now that we're kind of in the weeds on, that it just feels, makes us feel despair, forlorn, challenged, sad, angry, frustrated, all those pieces. And it may be very deservedly so. I mean, maybe there's very good reasons for that. Usually there are. And even in that, can we just take a breath and remember this day of creation? Remember this day that God has created a heaven and an earth, and that we do have the ability, so should we so choose, to just try to pull our minds up just a little bit for just a little bit of a higher perspective. And maybe the best we can nudge it is, because sometimes are so hard. Maybe the best we can nudge it is just to understand, well, God's here too. 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 Because it's always about heaven and earth. It's not about an escape plan from the challenges of life. It's not about that. It's about how do we have the two together, understanding we have to be able to make that distinction between our higher thoughts and our lower thoughts. God gives us that freedom. And maybe today we can just exercise in those harder moments just a little bit of a higher perspective, reaching for it as best we can. So I hope that makes sense to you folks, and yeah, just wishing you a beautiful day on taking that higher perspective as best you can in life. And I know many of you on this call do that very well. So that is my thought for today, friends. And what we're going to do right now is, now I'm going to ring the bell, and we'll have a chance for a little moment here of quiet meditation, and then a moment of prayer, and then a moment of blessing. And then, if you would like, you can leave a comment on New Church Live's Facebook page, and we'll be reading those out loud for a little end of the week commentary. So with that, dear friends, let's get a little breath. Meditation, and then a moment of prayer, and then a moment of, can't beat the meditation, my own voice coming on there. Be still and know that I am God. Oh my goodness, folks. Can't beat the meditation. I'm not helping out anybody here. All right, there we go. I'm going to ring the bell again, actually. There we go. Be still and know that I'm God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know that I. Be still and know that. Be still and know. Be still and. Be still. Be. Our Father, who art in the heavens, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and bring you peace and bring you home. Amen. All right, friends, let's go ahead and say hello. My apologies there. Yeah, just to be totally honest, a little distracted this morning. I just found out about a bridge collapse in Pittsburgh, my old hometown, actually in the neighborhood where both of my parents grew up. So that's a little on my mind and a little disconcerting this morning. So that's why I'm a little distracted, and my apologies for that. And so now time to have a little higher perspective on things this morning. All right. Here we go. All right. Patty writes, "Oh my, touching me so much today." Yeah, it just it's like how do we do that, right? Even in the midst of hard times, like how do we do that? Gene writes, "Good morning," and good morning to you, Gene. I think you're actually missing all the snow today, as is Lindy Botchnick. Good morning. No snow here, but it's raining cloudy. And yeah, we'll see what ends up happening. Uh, Linda writes, "Prayers go out to Cody, 12 years old, riddled with cancer. We can all imagine the pain of his family. My friend asked me, why does God allow children? And I faltered in response. Your thoughts?" That does come up, folks. And I've had a couple of times actually at Ronald McDonald House where I've had that conversation with someone. It's a place where we work with sick kids, and families will come up and say, why would God do this? And I had to get really clear for me that I don't believe God does that. I believe cancer is what does that. And that God's heart is always the first to break. I know years ago I had to get so clear on that for me, or frankly, I wouldn't have been able to continue as a Christian or a pastor. When a friend of mine in his early 40s died of cancer. Wonderful guy. Some of you may have even known him. His name was Matt Cole. And I got really clear that was not God's plan. There was no way, shape, or form that a 40-some-year-old dad dying of cancer was part of God's plan. I just don't think that. I think, part of God's plan was that the family, that he would be there too. And his heart was God's heart, always the first to break. So that's a great question. And then I don't know whether that's a great answer or not, but definitely think about that. Yep. Good morning. Disney weekend with Grants coming up. Oh, fun. That sounds great. And by the way, I'm a huge fan, just so you know, Merrily, of Ratatouille. That's my favorite one. My recent experience to discern my higher and lower perspectives gets focused by the message of the nearby cancer survivor plaza introductory plaque. Realize that cancer is life-threatening disease, but some beat it. Make up your mind that you will be one of those who do. Namaste. Boy, that's beautifully said. All right, because that's like the reality of it, right? Is that the reality of it is cancer, and these things are really hard. Lindy writes, "Thank you. You are welcome, Lindy." Um, uh, Marcia out in Colorado, have a great day. Same to you too, Marcia. Rich, if you have a particular question, feel free to shoot me a note on my private messenger. Carl writes, "One of my deepest questions as a 67-year-old, I'm wrestling with the feelings and challenges that accompany the reality that I might leave this life sooner than I thought was the likely future. But all of that comes into sharp perspective when I have encountered people who have to go through what I'm going through in their 40s or 20s or younger. If I could give them some years off my life chart, I would. You'd make me cry, Carl. Yeah, it's hard. I just life's just hard sometimes. I mean, it just is, and I think we just do the best we can, and that's why maybe I remember somebody talking about who was just going through this incredibly hard time, and and the one prayer they could muster in the midst of this hellish experience that they were going through was Lord, thank you for being here too. And I think there really is something to just that simple prayer. And somehow there's with all of this, like there's a preciousness that comes out of it. I mean, when I get sort of in the weeds on stuff as a pastor, the higher perspective for me, um, I don't know, one that just resonates. I'll just share this with you guys to close. I realize I'm rambling on here today. I'll share this, guys, with you to close. Is just Mother Teresa's great quote, which is me paraphrasing it a little bit. May we remember we belong to each other. We belong to each other. There's just a part of that that helps me to just like get out of the weeds. This is precious. There's a lot of pain here. There's a lot of sadness here, and it's sadness because we get reminded how much we do belong to each other and how much connections really matter. And I think that's a symbol of love. And yeah, heartbreak and love seem to go awfully close together. So, friends, blessings. Wishing you a great weekend. Hope you can join us next week again. And if you're getting hit by the snowstorm, blessings on that. May you be safe and enjoy sledding. And if you're nowhere near it, may you enjoy the sunshine as well. Take care, guys. God bless. Bye bye.